Hey Ryan, how's it going?
That's about it all. Jason, how you doing?
Doing good. I thought we'd just take a few minutes and actually go over some headlines that popped up on our news feed this week related to AI and some Gen AI topics. As you and I were just discussing, one of the big ones that came out that people were talking about is this report about MIT saying that 95% of generative AI pilots are failing. And I don't know about you, but as soon as I saw that headline, I immediately had some questions about what this means and who's reporting on this. If you go follow links around, it's going to take you to, I believe, Fortune is probably one of the main links. And of course, every paywall. So a lot of us don't take the extra effort to go read the full thing because it's not really
Right.
available to us. But anyway, I've spent some thinking about this and chatting with Drew and some others. And I don't know. What's your first take on this when you saw it?
Immediate hot take is a lot of people will talk about this in the same way that they talk about restaurants. So maybe opening a new restaurant will fail within the first 5 years. I think 50% is the number that people bandy about. That being said, there's also a lot of restaurants around that seem to be very successful. The 95% number, I think, is the first thing that I have problems with it. And it might be true. I guess the first question I've got is sample size. How many companies did you look at? The other is that when I look at companies, quote unquote companies that are out there making newer AI businesses, it looks like they're wrappers for things that are either already in existence or about to exist in something like a ChatGPT, maybe Anthropic, maybe Meta or Grok, whatever is going to come out and release a product that essentially does what a startup has been doing for either free or for pennies on the dollar, essentially. So there's a bit of consolidation in that aspect, as well as in a newer emerging market. I expect the startups to start and fail. Like this is what I expect. So it's maybe just the number and the sample size that I'm more concerned with. I'm less concerned about a lot of these things being doomed for failure because I think when we talk to people out there, the end state is that users are actually signing up for new services and getting either work done or eliminating toil in their personal lives, which tells me that there's certainly some success happening in the market. That's my take. Listen, I could be wrong. Obviously, maybe the sample size is 200,000, 2 million companies. It's possible. I just highly doubt it.
Yeah, I think that's my take too. I guess to be successful in this field in general, you have to have a healthy amount of skepticism about lots of things. Reports like this that come out that you can't actually get in and look at the details real easily obviously sets off a lot of alarm bells. And my first thing that I wanted to know is what are you, obviously the data set is important. Like how many people have you asked? But the next question I want to know is what are you using as your definition of success?
Right.
And failure, because a lot of, if you think about it, first of all, like most businesses fail and most new
Right.
features are not a success right out of the gate too. So a high number doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong. That's just like the usual thing. But also I think really defining what success means, because as you pointed out, there are clear efficiency gains. There are clear like things that are measurably improved over this cost reductions in certain areas. I think there's a list of things that we can come up with that we even ourselves have experienced in terms of success with different projects. We're not necessarily building things at scale for customers, that kind of changes things. But again, I have some skepticism and some questions about that report. And I just thought it would be interesting to get sort of your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And again, the other thing, I guess, just to color what I was saying before is these are pilots. I also expect companies within them. Let's assume that they're trying to replace employees with Gen AI agents, for example. And this does feel like early days for something like that. It could also be that they're using Gen AI agents for things like content generation or marketing. And we've seen some success in that area, but we've also noticed that there are problems with it. I think the third one for me might be something like chatbots, where we saw an early rise of customer service chatbots. And maybe now we're climbing back a little bit on that in terms of results. So I guess between those three, this could be for me a reason for this to happen. I did find the PDF. I'll send it your way. I was looking through it as we were talking. Sorry, I was spelunking through the web to find something very quickly. But I think the main thing is that even though they're adopting tools, it could be that it's like you're holding the tool wrong, or you're using the tool incorrectly, or using it in the wrong place, or maybe you're expecting it to do this much, whereas it only does about 10% of what you expected. There's a lot of that in this. So I feel like what you're talking about in terms of success criterion are actually the real stake in the ground here. That's going to tell you whether or not this is true. And based on what I'm seeing here, I think that's it. So they scored each industry from 0 to 5 based on 5 observable factors: market share, volatility, revenue growth, emergence, change in behavior and frequency. executive org changes. That's a little bit different than you and I expected while just reading the title. And I do feel like there might be a bit of fear, uncertainty, and doubt going on here as well with people sharing this without necessarily linking to the PDF. So they're talking about something without looking at the data. So there could be some of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like some of the reasons why it made the headlines, why it had the viral popularity, is because it does support some of the convenient narratives around AI. And I'm sure there's some truth in there for sure. But at the end of the day, I think our probably advice is for success for these is obviously understand your scope, understand your use case, what it is you're trying to solve for your user, make sure it's personalized for those use cases, and make sure you can measure whatever it is you've defined as success. I think that's the other thing, because otherwise somebody else is going to define that success for you. And then I think we end up with reports like this that are just a little bit questionable. So anyway, that was one thing that came up. Yeah, that was one thing that came up this week. And then the other one, I was just reading my inbox, going to my mail this morning, and we've talked about this before, the TLDR newsletter that
Yes.
comes out every day. There's one in there regarding AI topics that I usually read. And this was one of the links that showed up in that newsletter and caught my attention. So I wanted to just take a moment and go through that. But it's titled The Top 100 Gen AI Consumer Apps. Although as I scrolled through here, I did notice that there were some tools that we've discussed in previous episodes, tools that they transcend between developer tool and some other tools. These days, there's just so many different use cases for Gen AI that it blends between consumer and dev and all kinds of stuff. So anyway, this is another one of those reports that I wanted to chat about, because just like any report, yeah, I think it's important to understand who puts it out and motivations they might have for sharing it, and just understand where the source comes from, because we have to, like I said, this healthy amount of skepticism about some stuff. So I know you've taken a minute to read through this. Anything jump out to you that you want to talk about first?
You nailed one of my points right away, which is this is consumer apps, quote unquote. I'm saying that because one, the link doesn't say consumer app. Some of the apps in here, in my mind, not consumer apps. One of them's Cursor. Like I'd have a hard time arguing that Cursor is a consumer app, just as an example. The other is that though there are some apps in here that pre-existed that added Gen AI things on there, I think we're maybe forgetting that there are consumer apps that are top of the charts that have Gen AI features, which is what's driving a lot of the market adoption to them. So for me, of course, the favorite's going to be something like a Notion or a Canva or some of these apps that are out there that have these capabilities in them. I did notice a few of them in here. So maybe not in the first chart, but in the second chart, for example, we look at the real world space. And this is just the top 50 Gen AI mobile apps by monthly active users, as opposed to web products by active users. And again, we're already starting off on the wrong foot. Are we talking about apps or not talking about apps? Because the first one was just web products, and I don't feel like they're all apps. The second one is all apps, and it contains the things that I expect to see. So you've got the Swift key, for example, edits from Facebook, Microsoft Bing, like some of these tools that we would say are certainly apps that are popular, but they more have AI tools shoehorned into them. And they could be actually a big part of how the app functions now, but this isn't necessarily like a new mover or anything like that. And I think calling this a survey of apps makes me think that it's mobile apps, not necessarily websites or websites that could be used by apps. So for me, the second chart was maybe what I expected to see. The first chart, though, if we don't mind going back, I apologize. I have looked through a lot of these. The other thing that I'll say is that a lot of these apps, in terms of success, seem to be how do I call these companion apps where you might be chatting to a character. Maybe it's like a role playing Dungeon and Dragon thing. Maybe it's like an online companion that you're just talking to today, something that you just chat with essentially. And this appears to be a growth market. So it's like Character.ai is one of the ones that's mentioned in here quite a bit. Character.ai, of course, has A16Z investing in them, but Character.ai itself will especially give you like a persona that you can talk to. And I'm saying all this because we're talking about consumer apps. And a lot of times when I'm reading this report, I'm trying to think of what would the equivalent be for a business app. So for me, I would personally love to have a Jason Hand that I could bother all day long and be like, hey, what do you think of this? It like just shoulder tap you all day long and get your input would be amazing for me, especially if I could get my entire team as a virtual persona and they put in like their wants and needs and the things that are important to them. That's interesting to me. And I've definitely done that with ChatGPT and Claude in terms of setting up personas. Maybe it's for my audience, maybe it's for, again, little team members, or maybe it's just in terms of the industry itself, just to figure out how content might land or how statements may ring true or not, I feel like this actually might be something that's pretty handy. And that it could be that the consumer side of the market actually has a larger uptick on this, which could be like, I think I mentioned in the preamble, but like it feels like shadow IT. So something they might want to use for work, but there's not yet a work offering for this. It's not something that you can buy from Google or AWS or Azure right now. Whereas they can find it in some of these other tools and build up a persona that they can use perhaps when eventually these tools come to market. So that's one of the main things. The only other thing is that there's one sort of anti-Gen AI tool in here called Zero GPT. I think it's 38 on the list here. Zero
Okay.
GPT will essentially detect if there's Gen AI content in things that are out there. So I felt like that in terms of that security aspect, I was expecting to see more of that in here. Verify this robocaller or something like that. And perhaps this is an area where it's not growing into. But if we look at just the top 10, for example, in here, Character.ai and Janitor, for example, are both some of those character apps. The rest of these are ones that we would expect, but they're more, I think we expect people to use these on the web. Personally, I do talk to people who use ChatGPT on their phone for sure, but I don't talk to a lot of people who use Gemini on their phone, but will use a lot of the Google properties on the web, for example. I think it's for sure like it's got a mobile app. But Perplexity for me feels like the one when I'm talking to people that most people actually use. So maybe if we're talking to the developer persona and not just the Gen Pop persona, Perplexity seems to be the big hit of most people either had used it, have paid for it, or continue to use it. That seems to be the big one of these top 10s. But what about you? What's your experience? How does that fit with what I was seeing?
Yeah, I agree completely with all that. I think looking at this first list here, what jumped out, obviously the popular ones like ChatGPT and Gemini and DeepSeek. We use those regularly for lots of use cases, including in development. And then there's things like Lovable and Replit and Hugging Face and other things that are also part of the conversation. But there's so many things in here. I talk about getting knocked down in when you think the
When you're not
landscape
aware
of
of
AI,
there's a few for sure.
because there's stuff in here I've never heard of. And somehow they've made the top 50 Gen AI web products. Also, I will say web products is a pretty large category. So I'm willing to give a little bit of slack in terms of it's just difficult to categorize some of these tools. I absolutely agree with you. Character AI, Janitor, some of these ones that you're describing, those are not that this list says that they're specifically for devs, but I would never use them for that use. And this particular list, but as we scroll down here, it is clear that a lot of the tools or products or apps or whatever categorization they're using, they're all over the place in terms of some of them are mobile apps that you get. There's a direct link into the Google Play. There's stuff in here also that seems, without doing a little bit of background search, I can't verify for sure, but it seems like they're probably part of Andreessen Horowitz's portfolio, which was why they end up on reports like this, whether they totally fit the report in general.
Yeah, there's a bit of a lack of transparency. I would expect them to call that out.
Yeah, then again, like I said, that there's always reasons why reports like this come out. And I think we, again, the healthy amount of skepticism already that we have coming into these things, there's still some truths in here that I think are what I come to understand. And one of them that really jumped out to me, whether we like the way the data was collected and then we believe in how it was collected, there was one down here that they were talking about the vibe coding stuff that I wanted to chat about.
Right.
Obviously, we've done a few episodes of vibe coding. I talk about Lovable. I've been playing around with Replit lately. Here it is. So this one I really jumped out to me just again, because I've been using some of these lately. And if I skip ahead past that retention stuff, this one was the one that jumped out to me because I believe it's communicating to us that there are more people using the tool to build the apps than there are users using the apps. And I don't know if that's necessarily groundbreaking or anything, but I think it's, to me, shows a jump in interest of people who, this might be their first time building something, but they're in there a lot, building and learning and creating. But of course they're not part of that 5% success rate. So they haven't had something really big where they've got a lot of users, and maybe they don't even know what to do, but also a lot of those tools like Lovable and Bolt we've discussed previously, they're just not really set up for the type of growth and scalability that we're typically talking about. But as we look through this list and we see how some people are categorizing apps and web products, it's easy to understand that there's a really big spectrum when we're talking about this type of stuff. So again, a little asterisk that I think all of us have to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. The only other thing that I thought was interesting is that they point out that it's the ones that are hosted on Lovable itself is hosted on lovable.dev. The
Yep.
apps that you push are on lovable.app. But there's a third category here that they hint at a little bit is like when your app becomes a success, chances are you're going to bring your own domain and then it's not going to land on this chart at all. So it's like they flunk out of the success chart basically by being successful. So I just want to say some of this drop off to me makes sense. As the market increases, they may try different apps that are similar to Lovable. I think in my mind, Lovable is the de facto winner here, having tried all three right now. It might change. And it did feel like early days, Bolt was that winner. Now, the other thing that I really liked of all this, so there was Bolt, Replit, and Lovable on this list, is that they called out Supabase. Supabase in particular, only Supabase, which I thought was pretty interesting because there are other bring your own database offerings that you can include in these apps, but the majority of them are all on Supabase. And I guess what I'm really liking here, if we're getting into the citizen developer aspect and users are using these apps to build maybe to-do lists or grocery lists or what have you, they're starting to learn databases, which I think is fantastic. I don't know how much hope I have on people learning Supabase through the integration, but I think it's amazing that as they're going through building their apps, they're going to be learning essentially how to like think about database as like a Google sheet, as like you're working through a level base plan. Anyway, just a bit of an aside, but I'm here for the general population starting to learn about how these applications work and what that means when it comes to building a real world app. Like you're going to need state, you'll need some storage, those kind of features, basically. The last thing is that even though there are, I think, probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 competitors here, the fact that Supabase is having this meteoric, I think, rise to the top speaks volumes to me in terms of the way that you can use Supabase so easily, and that somebody who has never built an app before can integrate it into something like Lovable, Replit, or Bold without really thinking about it, but at the same time realizing that they need it. Anyway, so
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
maybe this is like a glowing recommendation for Supabase, but I like the way you use Supabase with these apps.
Yeah, absolutely. I view Supabase as, first of all, a great tool. And I think it really serves as a bridge to get those, whether they're vibe coded or not, but get some sort of simple app that maybe you can deploy someplace that doesn't need a proxy, no sort of backend like functions or anything really fancy, or no database whatsoever. But once you get to a place where you need some of this, you need to handle some authorization, you need to maybe make some API calls in a safe way. That's a hurdle for new people that they've never encountered. And you can't just throw them a link to the docs or a
Right.
link to an SDK and expect them to go figure it out. Because the best they're going to do is copy and paste both of those links right into their tool and say, figure this out for me. So Supabase is doing a great job. And clearly, if we were to believe these numbers, making it just really easy for somebody to click a button or two and have what they need for the agent, whether that's Lovable, Bolt, Replit, some other thing, to then say, okay, I have what I need now to go and build this more advanced application that you're now asking me to build. That's a new level unlock for, I think, a lot of people once they've gotten past that barrier. Now they are talking about building real problem solving apps. And like you mentioned, probably before long, they're going to want to put that out in front of some people. And maybe the lovable.app domain isn't what they want to use, or they already have a domain that they know they want to use, and they're just going to start doing that. Anyway, you can graduate out of some of the stuff that they're trying to measure.
That's
My
sorry, what I was
phone.
saying. Sorry, I shouldn't have said flunk out. Graduate out is exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Splunk out. I think it's a really a victim of success, not a victim. It's something that and that's happened to me. I've got a number of apps that I've built on several platforms that I just got to a point where I am ready to give it a domain and start circulating it amongst people, and like just the phase of the project. All right, that's really all I wanted to talk about, Ryan. I thought it'd be interesting to break from our usual where we do some hands-on stuff and actually talk about some news that came out recently that really I know a lot of us have been discussing, and yeah, just share our thoughts on it.
Absolutely. That was awesome. I think there are
All
some
right.
tools in here that we could probably use business day to day. And there's certainly some eye openers for me. It reminded me that I hadn't looked at Manus in a long time. So I probably have to look at, for example, 11 Labs. I think you've done a lot of work with, which I haven't really played with. Perplexity API. There's some of these ones in here where I've given them like a quick pass, but I should probably go back and look again.
Yeah, and some of those, like, it's maybe been a year or more since I have looked at them, and I'm sure much has changed since then. So, yeah, a nice little list of things to go play with, and as we do so, bring back our observations and share them with y'all. So, with that, we'll say goodbye, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.
Thank you.